So let's start off by creating a new armature. And you notice I just have a new collection start over here in my outliner. And then I'm going to go to add in object mode and go down to armature, then go to single bone. So looking over at our outliner, you notice that we have this new object called armature, and there's a pose for it. And then here is this bone that has been created within our armature. Let's go ahead and drop it horizontally. And we're going to label this our root bone. This is going to be our main bone that's going to kind of control the rest of the other ones. And then we'll go over to edit mode. And then I'm going to add a single bone. And this time, let's go ahead and shrink it down and move it up. And since I want to be able to see it, I'm just going to go down to my data and go to in front. And let's call this bone just spine for now. I'm going to keep my bones pretty basic and keep it pretty simple. That way we can focus more on the actual rigging and creating the FK and the IK. This is going to be our one of our main bones besides the the root bone. And I can simply do a little bit smaller. I will parent this to my root bone by going parent, and I'll keep the offset. So now my spine bone is within my root. And you notice that this little dotted line, they are attached. And then next I'm going to drop down and I'll create another bone. We'll call this one hip bone. And the same thing, we will parent this to our spine bone. So now I have my hip connected to the spine, and you can again make it a little bit more complex depending on your design. So let's go ahead and create some more spine bones. I like to do about 3 in the lower back, and this time I'm just going to simply extrude by typing an E and then Z to keep it on my x-axis or my z-axis, and then I will add a few more. And then I will go ahead and do one for the upper torso, and then go ahead and create one for the neck, and then just one for the head. I can go ahead and name these accordingly. So I'll go down to that one head, and then let's create some arms by simply going to duplicate my neck. I'll name this one neck too, and just doing Shift D. And then I'm going to type in, we'll call this one shoulder.l. And the .l for left is important because it'll help us copy this over when we go to the right side. So there's my shoulder, and then I'm going to extrude and extrude again. And we'll call this one foot.l. And then let's go ahead and select all of our bones on our left side. And then we go to armature, and then we want to go down to symmetrize. That's going to flip them all over, and then change the name to adding an R. But this is our, we'll say just, if you go down to bone collections, I'm actually just going to call this bone collection bones. This is going to be our base bones, and then we're going to create our FK and IK controls in different collections to actually control and modify this. So if we go back to object mode, let's go ahead and parent it, our skin, to our bones by selecting our skin first, and then selecting armature, and just doing Control P with automatic weights. So now if I go to pose mode and I move my hand and my arm, this is simply how we're looking at an FK or forward kinematics looking, but we're going to build specific controllers that's going to give us a little bit more control over it and a little bit better um, UI for it as well. So let's go back over to edit mode. And this time I'm going to select it all. And I'm going to make a duplicate of this skeleton for my IK and FK rigs. I'll just go ahead and do Shift D for duplicate, and I simply press Enter. And then I want to create a new bone group for this. And I could do this by simply going to pose mode or edit mode, and then I could do Shift M, and then I'm going to go to New Bone Collection. We'll call this first one, we'll start off with IK. And then now over here, you notice we have this bone collection, but I need to unparent it or take it away from the old um, bone collection so it's separate and I don't get it confused. So I simply just go to remove, and it's no longer a part of the original bone collection. So let's go ahead and create um, another, and I'll simply hide the first. I'll just hide my IK so I can create and select um, just my initial bones, and then I will create an FK for that as well. So I'll go to select all, and then I will press Shift D again for duplicate, Enter, and then I will create another bone group by going to Shift M, New Bone Collection, and I will simply type in FK for forward kinematics and move it to that. And then I will make sure that it is removed from the existing as well. And then the next thing I want to do with all these bones selected, let's make sure it's just the FK ones are selected. I want to make sure these aren't going to deform my skin or my mesh. So I'll do that by go down to my bone properties and holding down Alt and pressing deform so it applies it to all the bones. And then let's go back and do that to our IK as well. And these are only within the, making sure that it's only within my IK bone collections. And then I'm going to go to bone properties and Alt click the forms. And then the next thing I'm going to do to make this a little bit more organized, Outliner gets more complex. It's important to kind of keep everything really organized and labeled. So instead of having this be just named as rig.001, let's throw in FK as a prefix in there. And we do that by going to Edit. We go to Batch Rename, and then we have different options here. I want to go to the type is set name and then prefix. I'll put it in front. This is going to be IK for all of our IK, and then I need to switch this to bones. So rename 22 of our bones, click OK, and it throws our suffix or prefix of IK in there. Next, let's get rid of these extra numbers or digits by again going to batch rename, and then we're going to go to strip characters, and we'll go to digits at the end, and then we'll also strip characters punctuation at the end and press OK, and it got rid of all of our extra numbers and digits for our IK. Let's do the same thing for our FK. All right. So now let's start adding our IK controls first, because our FK is going to be pretty simple and pretty similar to our already original structure we have. So if I go to my IK, and then I also want to highlight my original bones, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a constraint to my original bones. Okay, first we want to switch over to our pose mode now. This is where sometimes it gets confusing because you're like, well, I don't know which mode I want to be in. But when we're adding our bone constraints, we want to be in our pose mode. So now that we're in pose mode, this little icon here pops up for bone constraints. So let's select a couple bones. First, I'm going to select my IK foot. So the IK version first, and then the next version, which is our original bone. And then I can go through add bone constraint and copy transform. But we can also do a hotkey, which is Control Shift C, and then go to copy transforms. And it automatically fills in which ones we need. It kind of speeds things up. You can also, after you've done that, if you do Shift R, it'll repeat the last thing you've done. So I go through, again, Control Shift C, copy transform, and then I can just simply do Shift R. let's go ahead and add in some actual IK controllers. So back over in edit mode, make sure that my IK hand is selected, and so it's my right here at my wrist or my IK forearm selected. I'm going to extrude out an extra bone, and then I'm going to simply unparent it by holding down Alt, pressing P, clear parent, and then let's go ahead and rename it to IK, we'll say, and control left, and then we're going to, so I want it to control my arm from my hand, but I need to first attach it to my hand. So I want it to move around that as well. So in edit mode, I will hold down, I'll press my IK hand bone, hold down shift, click my control, and then control P to make a parent and keep it offset. So now these two are parented. And then on my arm bone, let's go back to pose mode because that's where we can add our constraint. And this time, again, this is under my IK forearm for my controller. And we're going to add an IK or inverse kinematics tracking constraint. And then it's going to ask a couple different information. It's like, what's the target? And it's our initial armature. What bone is controlling it? And it is our control bone for our hand. And then it's going to ask how many objects are in the chain. And since we just have two bones in our arm, we'll just say two. So now when I move this around, oh, now I had it selected as one. Now when I move it around, it moves around my arm as well. But right now it has my hand is disconnecting. So I need to add a constraint on my hand as well. This time I'm going to just have a copy location constraint. Again, the armature, the bone this time is going to be my forearm for my IK on the left. And then I want to change it from the head to the tail. So now in pose mode, if I select my control and move it around, and now we have our first IK controller. Now let's add one more. We'll add one to the elbow, allowing us to spin the elbow or rotate it. So I will go back over to edit mode with my bicep selected this time. I will extrude out. Again, I will unparent it by doing Alt P, clear parent. It doesn't need to be that big, but maybe it'll help us see it better. So then I'm going to go back over to pose mode to modify my constraint. Let's actually rename this because what we're looking for is our pull target. Again, is going to be armature, but our control is going to be this bone here. So we'll call it, select our bone, and then we will go to let's rename it arm rotate. Sometimes you'll see it called like pull rotate or vector rotate, but I'll just call it arm rotate. And we'll add control in there as well. So let's go back. And yeah, that's a lot, a lot of effort to name stuff, but again, as you can already see, this is 22 bones, and it's getting pretty complex. So looking for this bone, now I can simply just type in control, IK, arm rotate, and you sometimes have to reset the initial value or the pull angle to something that's a little bit more natural. Sometimes it's flipped, but now in pose mode, I can go ahead and rotate my arm. So now we have a really basic IK controls for controlling our left arm. And you can make it more complex as, depending on your needs. If you want to add fingers, and we can even add more constraints if we want to avoid, how far some of these bones will bend. but sometimes keeping them simple and in the beginning makes it a lot easier for us to control them. Um, and we can go ahead and copy everything over to the other side. So now let's add one more control for our torso, and then we'll look at our FK. So I'm going to go ahead and click in between our hip and our spine, extrude out our control. I will, again, unparent it. I will just call it core. We'll say IK core control, and then go ahead and parent our hip and our lower spine bones to that bone. Let's go to pose mode. And I don't have my teeth attached, but you can see that now you have a pretty basic IK break setup. And I might adjust or flip my hip around. There might be some things I might play around with, but for now, that'll work. And then let's take a look at working on our FK rig. And it's going to be a lot simpler if I just go over to my data again, and I will erase my IK view for now. I'll bring back my regular bones, and I'm just going to go through and add the same constraints that I had before. So now we have both our FK and IK controls. And if I go to my bone and look at my constraints, I have two separate ones for each constraint. And they each have these influence percentages, and they're both set to 1 for 1% or 100%. And if you notice, when I move my IK, it doesn't follow through. What I need to do is I need to turn down my influence on my FK transform for it to follow it completely. So I need to go through, and I can do that for all of them. So now I can switch between the two, but it's kind of tedious if I need to do it all at once. So what I want to do is I want to create a switch, and we will do that by simply going back to edit mode, and I can go ahead and let's just extrude our switch out of the top of the head. We will unparent it, and we will just call this FK IK switch. And again, look how complex it's getting with our controls on top of our initial bones. So again, it helps keeping it organized and named according. So I can even scale this up. Let's move it out of the way. Now let's go back over to pose mode. And then I'm going to make sure that I lock all my transformations down. So I make sure that it's not going to alter anything I don't want to. And then what I'm going to do is go under bone properties and go all the way to the bottom, add a custom property. And I'm going to change the name of it to just IK FK switch, and then just also select library override and click OK. And then I'm going to right click on this percentage now and say copy as new driver. So now I'll go through under all my bone constraints and paste my driver in here. So paste driver, paste driver, and paste driver. You notice it comes in purple. So now when I select my switch in post mode, these properties come up and I can just alternate between the two. And then lastly, let's look at a little bit of again, how we mentioned the UI of these controls. They get kind of confusing because they look just like bones. So you can actually change what they look like. For instance, if I clicked on this, my rotation control here, and if I go to custom shape here at the bottom, so I can even control some of this, it'll let me replace it with a different object. And I have a gear object that I've already created. So it kind of relates to this idea and concept of like rotation. You can also change the color of it. If I wanted to have it be blue, but when it goes back to our edit mode, it'll move it. But again, in pose mode, it helps us really identify, the controls from our actual rig itself, and kind of also separating eventually our FK from our IK.